feeling of ambivalence. It's not a feeling of carelessness, but rather it's a feeling of trust, just knowing that God knows what he's doing. And it doesn't matter what it gets done, as long as it's God that's doing it, that I know that it's going to be okay and it's going to be all right. So I do celebrate the Lord. I celebrate my recovery from last week. For those of us that know, as we traveled into Philadelphia on last week, I think I was worn out for a good 2 to 3 days. I said, God, let's figure out how to do this. I must not be doing this right now. But I was totally zapped out for a good 2 to 3 days. It took me a while to recover. But that being said, we began last week's conversation about this whole notion, and you can be seated, about having our minds transformed, right? Our minds not being conformed to this world, but being transformed by the renewing of our minds. And we're trying with the help of God to get our minds in the right place. And I'm not talking about the old school get your mind in the right place, like get your mind out of the gutter. Not that type. It's less about what I'm getting my mind from and more about what I'm trying to get my mind to. It is not simply a departure from the old. It is walking in the newness. Does this make sense to anybody? Because it's very easy to get caught up on killing the old man, but never really begin to really walk in the new man. Escape from slavery is not, we're not satisfied just to say that I've left Egypt and to leave and to live our lives in wilderness forever. But at some point we've got to do more than leave Egypt. We've got to enter into promised land. That makes sense for anybody. And I think that for a long time in church, because all we knew was wilderness, we began to get very comfortable always preaching about leaving Egypt, leaving Egypt, leaving Egypt, leaving Egypt. And our whole mindset of deliverance was simply leaving Egypt. And it was never really about really going into what God had for us. If that makes sense, right? As you can't live your whole life just talking about what you escaped. Right? You can't live your whole life just celebrating on what's in the middle, as it were. At some point, we've really got to, as a body of Christ, really begin to focus on, no, it's not enough just to talk about who I'm not, but who am I? Not enough to talk about where I left, but really where I'm going. And I think that sometimes we struggle to reach a new generation that's far more inquisitive because for a long time, our definition of progress was what we left behind. And so you can't live but so long living life in the rearview mirror. We constantly celebrated what was behind us, but we had nothing pulling us towards what was before us. This makes sense to anybody, right? You can't always be in escape mode. You can't always just be in survival mode. You know, that was back, oh, did you see where we were? Oh, thank God we got it. And we're running from something. But after a while, running from something gets old, right? You know that in the horror movies, right? For those of you who ever seen one, you know, the monster's there, you run from there, you get a safe distance, and you stop running because you don't got nowhere to go. You left your home. And all you were trying to do was escape the monster. But in the body of Christ, we can't merely be so short-sighted as to quote-unquote run away from the monster but not have a destination. The text says where there is no vision, people perish. And you do sort of run out of steam. There has to be a compelling vision toward the future. There has to be a compelling vision toward the future. Not just the present, but toward the future. And I believe that that's part of the reason why the devil does not like for us to talk about spiritual things and eternity and all of those things that the devil is trying to convince us are of little value. You know, we got all the cute little expressions, so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. And now we've got a whole church of just earthly minded folks that have no heavenly perspective, right? And so then, because of that, when either tragedy hits, God forbid, or even when transition hits and people leave this place and transition to another, because we have undervalued eternity so much, now we have to try to fit in a 20-minute funeral sermon, something people should have been learning all throughout their Christian experience. But we constantly say, well, heaven, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about that. I want to hear about the here and now. How do I put this in my life right now? I'm living now. And yet that's never what we were called to do as Christians. That's never been our focal point. Does that make sense? It's been the mindset of, no, I'm here temporarily, and I'm really going to another place. This really is not the end for me. This is not the only world in which I have hope. I have a hope that goes beyond this. And that reality of the future is even more real to me than this stuff that's passing through. If it were not for the hope of the future, perhaps I would be depressed when that great apostle Peter says that the earth will melt away with fervent heat. And unless you have some sort of penchant towards destruction and death and suffering, it is very difficult to celebrate that without recognizing that destruction is only a precursor for what God has in store for us after that there's something big that's in store for us. There's a huge assignment that's in store for us. There's a plan that's in store for us that God has for us. And he provides us glimpses. He provides us little previews that are intended to be reminders to us and to those with whom we speak that God really does have something for us. The Bible says that men's hearts would fail them for fear in the last days. And I'm trying to let my heart fail me. I want my heart to do okay, right? And so when we talk about hearts being okay, one of the things that Jesus does in John chapter 14, he says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Then he gives them a clear vision for the future. What will propel you forward is a clear vision towards the future. Not simply running from the past, not simply escaping the past, not simply escaping the old man, but no, we've really got to grab on to the new. There's no point of getting promoted from third grade and never entering into fourth. Right? Oh, I thank God I graduated from third grade. Yeah, but where are you going? Right? It's about progression, entering into the new thing. And so a lot of times we like to talk about new stuff, new houses, new cars. If God would enable me, and if I do this correctly, we will make new cars look like stupid and dumb. If I don't do it correctly, blame me and not the future that God has in store for you. Is that all right? If we do this right, the things of this world grow strangely dim by comparison. And the future that God has that's awaiting us becomes awesomely, awesomely incredible. And so, this is the book of Revelation. This is actually one of the concluding chapters. There are only 22. We're looking at 21 today. A whole lot of stuff has happened between the last time we were in this as a corporate body, probably around chapter 6, I think, and now 21. No, you did not miss Bible study. A lot of stuff has happened. There's been seals and bowls and all sorts of things pouring out judgment upon a world that really has rejected a loving God. I try to underscore how amazingly loving God is. If your gospel does not describe an amazingly loving God, then you've absolutely missed the entire point of what's being revealed here. It's even hidden in 3:16, perhaps the most popular and widely known scripture. For God so loved the world. And if that love doesn't expand beyond your definition of how you love and expand beyond your definition of how your family loves, and ultimately points to a love that's beyond everything that you could have ever imagined, you've not even scratched the surface of the identity of God. For your text declares that when God wants to describe himself, he merely says God is love. And so it's a very powerful love. And the enigma, probably for angels, the enigma certainly for those of us sometimes that are believers, is how could a God love so much and so strong and so persistently, and yet people continue to reject him, to not be won over by this amazing love of God. It is not an absence of God that results in the judgment that we see in the book of Revelations. It is not a evil in the heart of God. It is not malice in the heart of God. While you can certainly argue there is a wrath and an anger, it is a righteous wrath. It's a righteous anger against those who are so full of hate that not even the love of God for them it causes them to turn, even when God gives space to repent. And so towards the culmination of this, God then deals judgment upon humanity in terms that are described pictorially, in terms that are described symbolically, but utter devastation, at times a third of the population being wiped out. utter devastation. And yet God keeps sending these little glimmers of hope. And so at one point you'll find that there are two witnesses that are sent, and the two witnesses come and they're proclaiming God, and the world, because of its hatred against God, actually kills these two witnesses. And they're so happy that they were able to actually get rid of these two witnesses that they have a global holiday, and they start sending gifts to one another because these witnesses are finally gone. I mean, that's the extent of the hatred. And before we get to 21, there is this season that the church experiences, that the people of God experience, where there is increasing hatred towards the things of God. Increasing hatred towards God himself. That although God continues to manifest his love and manifest all that he has ever been, there are people that still say, I want nothing to do with it. And it becomes very polarized. Society becomes very polarized. Most will probably define themselves as, indifferent, somewhere in the middle. Most people don't necessarily hate God that aren't Christians. Many people just simply aren't that interested. They're kind of indifferent towards him. Probably not the top on the radar. That's not the top on and the priority list. However, as time unfolds in human history, there become two very, very distinct sides. One is the force of evil. One is the force of good. And people find themselves being polarized very strongly into one camp or the other. Your actual human existence, your survival, in many cases, your economics are all linked into whether you buy into this world system. And we talked about it last week. Be not conformed to this world. And the ultimate manifestation of this worldly system is what in the Bible is called Babylon. Babylon. And Babylon the Great will certainly fall. She has a lot of things that externally look very good and look very prosperous. Gold and all that kind of stuff. You probably couldn't imagine a more prosperous city on this side of eternity. And so it looks like it's all going good, and then all of a sudden the judgment of God just falls absolutely upon it. But with Babylon and with the world system are a number of things that are intertwined. So, for example, at some point, by the time you get around chapter 13 or so, you're not able to buy or to sell unless you have the mark of the beast, right? It's a matter of you being marked by this system, that you are part of identifying with this system. Because remember, in chapters previous, God marks his own servants and says, nope, don't hurt those that have been marked. I have marked them. And the enemy marks those that belong to him as well. And so it becomes a matter of choosing sides. Either you're on God's side or you're on the devil's side. And when I was young, there was an expression that said, you cannot straddle the fence, right? You can't be in the middle. You've got to actually, no one gets to heaven by accident. Heaven is a prepared place for prepared people. And so I want to talk about this new thing that God then inaugurates following catastrophic destruction, following natural disasters of an order and a magnitude that none of us could have ever imagined, following Armageddon and a huge global war that takes place where almost seemingly countless lives are lost in the process. And it looks like, if you look at geopolitical forces, if you look at economic forces, you look at natural forces, it looks like the world has spiraled absolutely out of control. And then by the time you get to 21, after God has executed formal judgment, now we begin to see what his plan has been all along. What he's been trying to get to all along. Chapter 21, verse 1, this is John speaking. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Why? For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. And so we could not get the new heaven and the new earth until the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And so it was of necessity that the first heaven and the first earth pass away. And it's why it's so important for us to align ourselves not with this present world, but to align ourselves with the world that is yet to. You do know there's another world coming, right? And I'm conscious that this probably sounds really crazy, right? It does. I mean, I cannot even imagine a world besides this one. I don't know any other way. I was born into this world. This is all I know. Lived here for a couple decades now at this point. I've seen technology increase, but it's still been the same world, right? I've seen people come and go, met some new people, seen people in different parts of the world, right? Different countries, etc. Been on different hemispheres at this point, which is kind of cool, right? But at the same time, it's all been this same world. The whole notion that everything that you know, that you have seen, that you have touched, is all gonna at one point disappear is just absolutely crazy. And it's all the more reason why we need to get used to not defining our reality by what we see, because what will you do when the day comes when what you have been accustomed to seeing is absolutely gone? What was normal for you now will just be absolutely, in some cases, utterly absent in the world to come. It's just an amazing new thing, and it's probably great that he utilizes the terms a new heaven and a new earth. He wants to do this thing absolutely new. He told us, he gave us previews. He said things that perhaps the religious elite didn't like, but it was true nonetheless, that you cannot pour new wine into old wineskins. And I'd imagine that you can't put old inhabitants into a new world and expect them to not if they're going to have the same mindset. Right? It was kind of the issue. And we started off talking about Egypt and leaving Egypt. But it's not enough to leave Egypt. You've got to get Egypt out of you. Because if you don't, you'll spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness complaining about a place that you ask, complaining to go back to a place that you ask God to get you out of. Right? And so I need to not only get out of Egypt, I need Egypt to get out of me, and I need to not only get out of the world, right? For all that is in the world, the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, all these things of the world, and out of the Father, right? And I've got to get not only out of the world, but I've got to get that worldly mindset out of me. I've got to get the world training, the world programming out of me. And it's weird because the world's constantly programming us in multiple directions, etc. But I've got to get it out of me because God is sending a new heaven and a new earth. And I want to be a citizen there. And it's more important for me to fit in there than it is for me to fit in here. Because all this stuff that people are spending their whole lives trying to grasp, and we must be possessed. Our minds must be messed up. We must be programmed to sit here and spend our whole lives trying to get stuff that at the end of the day will, for the most part, not mean a hill of beans to anybody. Right? We spend our whole life, we trade our souls, we trade our identity. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose our souls? Our souls are that which transition from this along with our bodies at the resurrection, but the essence of who we are, that's all we have, and that transitions with us to the next world. And we care so little about that and so much about stuff that will not make the transition. As God is trying to get people to leave Egypt, will too, and get them to transition into promise, and trying to get them to acclimate to how life is going to be in the future, all they can think about is cucumbers. Cucumbers? It's amazing how the most insignificant thing in this world have a way of just pulling us and keeping us and distracting us, etc. I mean, the things that just constantly bother our minds. I was talking to a friend of mine, and it's crazy because it doesn't matter. This world drives off of economic principles and money and things of that nature. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Everybody still ends up with money problems and money issues. It doesn't matter, right? And so I was talking to a friend of mine, I said, it's really funny because, at one stage of income, in one social class, you're wondering, oh my gosh, can I pay for medicine? Or do I pay my bills? Do I pay my rent? Do I pay my that? Then another social class, it becomes, well, how do I afford to have a newer car versus this older car that I'm driving, etc.? And how do I, navigate the social world, buy the name brand stuff that I want? But then there's another social class that's just like, how do I maintain my financial status such that I do not lose it through inflation over the years to come? But everybody's still fixated on the same thing. Everybody's still competing against one another. And that mindset, at the end of the day, it's like, hey, you don't take none of this stuff with you. You don't take any of this stuff with you. You don't take any of this stuff with you. And whatever monuments are built in your honor, and whatever, and I've often fondly thought about perhaps temple, building a building with the Blackman name on it. Seems so nice, right? But ultimately, if we're honest with ourselves, not even that will last forever. All of this stuff is going away. And so you can spend your life either trying to attain some level of success. Now, here's the funny thing. We spend our whole lives sometimes trying to get promotions, trying to get to certain levels on jobs. And then when you leave your job, the funny thing is that they will put an ad in the news. Well, they don't do it anymore. They'll put an online thingy out, right? A requisition, right? They'll put a job posting out, and someone else will apply and get the job that you fought people for. None of this stuff lasts. None of this stuff lasts. None of this stuff lasts. You will spend your life trying to build a reputation, perhaps in the community, perhaps in the church, and generations will pass, and perhaps no one will even remember your name. Isn't that terrible? Mm-hmm. Not making this up. This sounds like Ecclesiastes, right? You will save up your money and say, you know what? At the very least, I will create a legacy. I will pass my money on to my children. And then your children may not have the same degree of discipline that you do. And then with a matter of years, what you worked your whole life to gain can suddenly be gone in a matter of years. Crazy how that happens. The houses that we build, that we purchase with thought process of, and you know, when I'm gone, perhaps my grandchildren will live in the same house. Many of those houses now sit dilapidated in North Philadelphia, as people that thought that they had worked their whole lives for houses to leave them to your loved ones now sit in utter neglect and shambles. What I'm telling you is that none of this stuff that we spend our whole lives working towards ultimately lasts at all. What shocked the mess out of me at some point when I was younger, I had a little bit more of an interest in cars than I do now, although I still like classic cars aesthetically. What blew my mind was the fact that when we had gotten our first car was a Toyota Celica. It was a really older car. And one of the great things about having an older car is that when you have parts, you don't have to order them from the dealer. You can go to a junkyard. And the junkyard is full of people's dreams. You don't hear me. The junkyard is full of people's dreams. People had dreamed about having this car, driving this automobile. Perhaps had sacrificed their family's well-being. Perhaps had turned on people, did evil things to their coworkers in order to get money, to get this dream car. And yet ultimately, at some point, most cars find their way to a junkyard. It's crazy. It's mentally inconceivable that you could work so hard for a car and then ultimately it ends up here and sold and stripped for parts and for scrap metal when they were made of metal, right? Things of that nature. And now it's all gone. It's absolutely gone. It's absolutely gone. People that spend their whole lives trying to get exercising, trying to stave off death, and trying to take the right supplements, and I only eat organic, and I have a vegan diet, and yet the cemetery is full of dead bodies. None of this stuff actually lasts. None of it actually lasts. Because I saw a new heaven and new earth. The first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Interesting, I don't want to call it interesting contrast here. When we saw Babylon, Babylon was a her. Babylon was more accurately perhaps described as a prostitute, right? And people were enamored with Babylon and all that she symbolized and all that she had, and people were greatly deceived by her. And now here comes the bride. And the question often that we probably need to ask ourselves is, are we willing to be part of the bride, or will we compromise ourselves to be part of the prostitute system, right? So there's Babylon, which has its allure and it's fleeting, but it looks good for the moment. But here comes the actual bride that's actually being coming down out of heaven, prepares a bride for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. Certainly, this is the great promise of the old covenant, as carried out in the new as well, that ultimately God will be with them. It's funny, we went right from talking about the fact there's a new heaven and new earth to talking about the fact that the tabernacle of God is with men. What this indicates, when we look at this city, when we look at the dimensions, etc., the key point to understand here is that there is not merely a temple inside the city. The whole city is the temple. The whole city is the Holy of Holies. The whole city is where God himself dwells. And he will be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things are passed away. There is no sadness in this place. There is no discontent. God bless you. There's no discontent in this new place. If there was anything that could make you miserable, God has dealt with it. This is a perfect place, but yet I feel so sad. And God's like, nope, I'm going to wipe your tears away. This is a perfect place, but what if somebody dies? No, I'm taking away death. This is a perfect place, but nope, no more sorrow, no more crying. But I feel so, nope, no more pain. No, the former things are passed away. Those things that were true before, those things have now passed away. He that sits on the throne says, a couple words said, behold, I make all things new. Everything absolutely new. God, prepare me to live in a world where everything is made new. And he said unto me, write, for these words are true and faithful. Can you imagine a life where there are no more tears, no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain? How much of our own existence is spent just trying not to die? I mean, it sounds funny, but and I'm talking about just for people at one end of the social spectrum, to all levels of the social spectrum. How much time do we spend just trying to survive? And so we go to work so we can get money, so we can go to the supermarket and get some food. You do know if you don't eat, you die, right? And so we try to get food just to survive. And perhaps we're too blessed, or we're too far away from it. But you do realize there are people on street corners right now in Philadelphia who are trying to eat so they don't die. That's reality. There are people, if you go outside of this country, and other countries, that literally are just trying to get food to eat, And I know there are some people that in our area that, they kind of be faking it, trying to get some money. But if you watch long enough, there are some people that are so desperate for food that they really are digging in trash cans, eating what you have so much of that you're willing to throw away, right? There really are people that really are just trying to just stay alive, just the balance between life and death. They're just trying to stay alive. There are people that are buying security systems around their homes in poor areas, not just to protect their valuables, of which they don't have many, but perhaps just trying to keep their lives safe. You understand what I'm telling you? That there are people just trying to stay safe at night. People that are trying their best to keep their children safe because they know their children are going out into neighborhoods where sometimes, I don't know why, bullets just fly randomly, right? This whole notion of just trying to, how much of our life is preoccupied with just trying to survive and just avoid death that seems to be trying to wait at every corner. When you leave this church, if you are wise, you will get into your car and then you'll put on your seatbelt. Why are we wearing our seatbelts? We're trying to avoid the catastrophic results of accidents, because although we may be good drivers, other people might not be the same degree of good drivers that we are. We are constantly at war trying to stave off the force and the impact of death from off of our lives. We're constantly being impacted. Imagine a world where death is not a factor. We all talk about how much we know about heaven. We can't even get the concepts. I won't pretend to get the concept of what it meant to live life without. What if you didn't have to eat in order to survive? I mean, really, how much of life is dedicated just to you doing things just to be able to survive? Just basic level survival, right? We're putting money in our 401k plans. Why are we doing that? Because one day we're going to be older, we might not be able to work. Or worse yet, our jobs might lay us off before we're even ready to retire. So we got to have money hopefully saved up. Why? So we can eat. So we can eat and not die, right? Really, right? We're trying to have shelter and things of that nature, right? We're trying to avoid pain at all costs. What would it mean if there was a world where pain just did not exist? I'm not talking about where you've been, you go through pain and God heals you from the after effects. No, I'm talking about, what does it mean for a world not to have pain? What does it mean for a world not to have bad crying? You know, sometimes you're so happy you cry. I'm talking about not to have sorrowful crying. What does it mean to not have to deal with crying? There's nothing to make you cry. Nothing to make you cry. You wouldn't even get up in the morning. No, well, have you ever really pondered what that level of existence really means? Because most of us get up and go to work so that we don't die. Right? We get up, we go to work so we can have food, and so we can take care of our necessities. That's what drives many of us. What happens when that's no longer a factor? You look both ways before you cross the street. Because I'm not trying to experience any pain, right? It's like, what happens in a world where pain does not exist, where sorrow does not exist, where it simply is absent, where it just does not exist, and where this is not simply a fantasy world. This is not brought to you by Disney. This is not a Pixar film. This is real life. I hope you get that. This is not fantasy world. This is not some philosopher's utopia. This is the promise of God. Because it's very easy for us to mentally dissociate these things. Like, there go Pastor talking about that utopian stuff again in the sweet by and by. No, this is not it's not figment of somebody's imagination. This is the promise of God. What does it mean for God to promise you a world where there absolutely is no sorrow? And how much would you pay to get into a world like that? You might say, I wouldn't pay nothing. And yet, statistics seem to show otherwise. There are people who are so concerned about being able to have status and to survive and not die. You'd be amazed how much money people spend in order to get the fountain of youth, or how much money people spend in order to get, hopefully, the medicine that will extend the life of their loved one just for 2 months. Just for 2 more months. And we're talking about the fact that God is actually going to create or bring in a city where there is no death at all, no sorrow at all, no crying at all. It gives you a glimpse into what's important to God. If I were defining paradise, if I were writing my book on what God is going to promise to me, perhaps I might have written some other things, but I write them from the values that have been programmed into my mind. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, and there's like this great whatever on every block, whatever your whatever is, right? And God's like, yeah, you could have that on every block, but you'd still be sad. And I'd have this, like, yeah, but you might still be crying. So when God looks, God's like, when he looks at the state of the world, he looks at what's wrong with this world, he doesn't say, I'm getting rid of that bad political party. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, I'm going to get rid of all of these sort of things that are going. He doesn't say that. No, he speaks in much more higher level terms. Like, what bothers me is that there are people on my planet that are crying. And on one hand, it's like, wow, that's kind of like, well, I was like, wow, that's really powerful. God cares that people are crying so much, he's like, next time, we're not having that. And God looks, he's like, there are people that are dying. Right? And while it's debatable whether there was ever death or the potential for death in Eden, what is not debatable is that when we look at what God has sent for us in the New Jerusalem, there will be no death. So when I do this again, no more death. Not only no more crying, not only no more death, but that hope, that feeling of sorrow. Next time, no sorrow. No sorrow this time. No sorrow. Could you imagine life without ever having sorrow? Without ever looking back and like, boy, that's really terrible that happened. I can't watch the news without sorrow. Somehow in my mind, I remember a time when you could watch the news and happy things happen on the news. I don't know where I got this from. Maybe it didn't, but I felt like I looked at it was on Channel 6, back when Channel 6 was not CBS, not whatever it was. Channel 6 was WCAU. Was it WCAU? I forget what the call numbers were. But Channel 6 was something else. And it seemed like there was Jim Gardner, this guy with this big mustache, etc. And life was happy. They told like happy story. Children now at the Please Touch Museum. It was like, yes, it seemed like it was really happy, right? And there were happy commercials, right? And it'd be like this whole show just about graduation. The autographs, the cap and the gowns, the honors that you earned. Right? You're the best of the class this year. I'm like, wow. Anybody remember that stuff besides me? Y'all remember that? You remember that? You remember that, right? It was happy stuff on the news. And now you look and it's just, seems like increased sorrow. Now part of that, I guess, is that sorrow sells. But it's like, it just seems like constant sorrow. Imagine a world without sorrow. I haven't seen much in terms of God's definition of material stuff. And maybe that's because God, in his view, sees material things as secondary at best. And the most important thing is, how are they doing? Because the truth of the matter is that you can get all this material stuff that you want and still have sorrow. How do you know there are rich people that have sorrow? Right? There are people that have all this kind of great stuff that die, right? And no matter how much money you have, when your time is up, your time apparently seems to be up. And although you would give all your money to extend your life, there is no amount of money that will extend your life when it's over and when it's done, right? And so it would seem to me that God places values differently than we do, or maybe God gets to the crux of the things that we're in denial about. And so we don't think about it in those terms. We get distracted by the intermediaries. And so we don't say, oh, I'm trying not to die. We say, but I need affordable health care. We don't say, I'm not trying to die. We say, I need food to eat. I need drugs and medicine. Right? And God gets to the nexus of what's really at the heart of the matter and says, I'm getting rid of death. Right? And that means that there are people that will be around for a very, very long time that you can't get rid of. You better learn how to love people. You better learn how to love people. That's more than just a notion. You better love everybody. There will be no night there. No, oh, I'm going to sleep. See you tomorrow. There is no tomorrow. But see you all day long. All day. Very long day, right? Does I make all things new, right? He said to me, I'm Alpha and Omega, the beginning, the end. I will give unto him that is athirst the fountain of water of life freely. Remember that kind of verbiage from the Old Testament? Come and get water for me without price, right? He that overcometh shall inherit all things. Again, this language, I will be his God. He shall be my son. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth, with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. These are known as vice lists, right? They're not meant to be exhaustive, but they're a list of vices that most people within the time frame will be able to identify. And basically says, so there are inhabitants of this wonderful place, but then there are people that will not be admitted into the city, and these people have a place that they're going as well. It's a lake which burns with fire. It's a very interesting concept, right? Usually lakes have water in them. This lake actually burns with fire, so the imagery is of rolling waves of fire, right? Which does not sound like a good place. I don't need to know how about it because I don't plan to go. And there came unto me one of the seven angels, which had seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and taught me, saying, come here, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. He carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain. Remember, Babylon sat upon seven mountains. If you were reading it in Revelations before, this was one high mountain. Showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. This has the glory of God, and her light was like unto stone, most precious, even as a jasper stone, clear as crystal, and had a great wall, and the wall was high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels and names written thereon, which are the names of 12 tribes. This is interesting. Most cities had a primary gate by which you entered into the city. The reason why? You don't want to defend a whole lot of gates, right? The more gates you have, it's like having doors in your house, right? The more doors you have, the more sensors you have on the door, right? The more doors you have, the more you have to guard, because there is no danger here. The whole thought process is that, no, we can have gates, we are safe. Three gates in each of the directions, written on the, and names written thereon, which are 12 names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, south 3 gates, west 3 gates, and the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that taught me had a golden reed to measure the city. The last time we did these kind of measurements, I think it might have been chapter, was it 4 or 5, 7? Somewhere around there. They were starting to measure. But here we go again with the golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. Now, and the city lies 4 squares, so it's a square, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. For perspective, it was about 1,400 miles. 1,400 miles long. And it's a cube, and so it's 1,400 miles in this way, 1,400 miles in that way. For this time period, that was considered a huge, huge city. For perspective, I believe that Philadelphia is around 325 or something like that square miles. This is 1,400 square miles. So it's huger than Philly. This is a huge, huge city by definition of cities. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. He measured the wall thereof, 144 cubits. The breadth of the wall, 144 cubits, is equal to, and you've got to really try to picture this in your mind. I was trying to think how I was going to explain it. 200 feet. That's a serious wall. 200 feet. Now, to give you perspective on 200 feet, I use my Waze a lot, my GPS a lot. 1,000 feet, for most of you, as you know, is really about the size of a city block. So you divide that by a fifth, you get the 200 feet. That might not be good conceptually either. 200 feet, how do we define that? Probably, if we took the one end of my house to the other end of my house, that actually might get us, because 50 feet was Thomas Avenue. So we do Thomas Avenue 4 times, that's 200 feet. So probably about the width of our house, somewhere close to that, gets you approximately at 200 feet. Imagine a wall that's that thick. Everybody ought to feel really secure in this city. The walls are ridiculously thick and thick. What you're supposed to get from this is like, ooh, wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. How in the world Do you get that? Right? It's an amazing, amazing thing. The building of the wall of it was of jasper. The city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And the foundation of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, etc. What he begins to enumerate here are many of these are actually the stones that were on the high priest's garment. And so when we talk about the 12 tribes, etc., and you look at these things, supposed to remind us of that original temple. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. The Babylonian city, it had some pieces of it that were gold. It was adorned with pearl. In this instance, the city is of gold, and the gates are actually pearl. The street was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. The city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. I can't even understand it. Oh my gosh, you can go out, you can sunbathe, no UV rays, no sunscreen necessary. Isn't that wonderful? If that's not heaven, I don't know what is. See that? And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of earth do bring glory and honor into it, and the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it, and there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. Again, the interesting and incredible thing here is that it's this huge city. God has taken great care to make sure that it's absolutely perfect, and yet when he describes it in terms that emotionally resonate with us. Right? There's no sorrow there. Now, deep into this, but not only do we try to evade death and all those sort of things, but if you think about how our society works and how we get things done in this world, when I asked you to think about a world where there was no death, where there was no sorrow, no pain, etc., many of you probably felt a little bit happy. But think about a world, how do you control behavior? Where there's no death, no sorrow, no pain, no crying. All right, have you ever thought about how, because at the same time that we all love the idea and the concept, isn't that how we manipulate others to get our way? If you don't give me your money, I'm going to shoot you and kill you. And your fear of death makes you do what I want. If you don't do this, you're going to be sorry. Right? I'm going to make you cry. I want to know this information. I'm going to torture you with pain until you give me what I want, right? All manipulation tools are suddenly gone and absent in this new world. Isn't that a crazy thing to think about? Right? There's no manipulative techniques. All of that is all gone, and now we're able to just be with God, and he himself becomes the light of the city. He himself becomes the light, the radiant light that shines through all these beautiful, and God cares a lot, obviously, about beautiful things. I think he likes HGTV just like me. And so there's this these amazing stones. Imagine how the light shines through the stones. I mean, no detail. No detail is just left to itself. God has actually purposely designed everything for us perfectly. We're going to be okay. How different is that than the world in which we live today? And how willing we should be to go, like, God, I'm looking forward to a city whose builder and maker is God. When God makes the city. Right? When God makes a city, this is what he does. And so I'm trying to the best of my ability, I'm trying to be mindful of the glory that God has invested for us in the future in terms of, wow, this is absolutely glorious. I'm trying to be mindful of the fact that everything that I know about life right now, most of that is not going to translate to the life of the future. All the stuff that you learned about how to get ahead, what makes you like wonderful and great, none of that counts for anything. The stuff that you think impresses people will not impress anybody in the kingdom. You do realize that, right? And so, I'm wearing this nice, this, that, and the other. It's like, nobody impressed with your clothes, nobody impressed with anything you got, nobody impressed with your degrees. None of that stuff, you do realize none of that stuff, it's not like you die and then you go into the new world. It's like, by the way, just so you remember, I went to Harvard when I was in the old world. It doesn't pay to be arrogant, because none of this stuff that you're arrogant about now is going to count in the next world. I mean, none of it. None of this stuff counts. I used to live, on a wonderful, pristine street in a great neighborhood. It's like, and none of that counts for anything in the future. So all those things that you thought might have given you additional credibility, made you great and wonderful in this world, none of that happens in the new world. You don't get the glory or boast or anything. The only thing that validates your presence there, and the only reason why you're not in that lake that's filled with fire, is because there was a cross. And there was a God that cared enough about you to come in human form and hang upon that cross and pay that debt for you so that you would never have to experience that lake of fire. And so he could bring you into a place where there would be no sorrow and no death and no pain and any of that other kind of stuff. And I get it, because sometimes we look at life, we're like, oh my gosh, God, you want this for me? And if I do this, it's going to be painful. And God, if I do this, I might die, right? And we're so far removed from the reality of the fact that, no, God's not interested in you just being dead, whatever. God's not trying to kill you. He's trying to bring you to a place where you'll live forever. He's trying to get you to a place where, but this mindset that we have does not work, does not translate over. That's why it's so important that we get this stuff right. That's why it's so important that we don't have pride and big eyes and little ears. I'm really big on us not having that. Why? Because none of this stuff matters in eternity. None of the stuff people are fighting for, trying to kill one another, none of this stuff really matters in the grand scheme of things. Certainly God will take care of you in the present, just like he took care of the children of Israel when they were in the wilderness. He did not let them starve and die in the wilderness necessarily. Those that he was taking on to promise, at least, they survived. He gave them manna from heaven. Life was good, etc. But that being said, how do I get myself in a place where I can even enjoy being with God? Here's the thing. If you don't like being in the presence of God now, heaven's a miserable place for you.
That's how it is.
And so while some would ask questions like, how could a God that loves people ever let somebody go to hell? It's like, well, what's the alternative? Eternity with the person you hate? Not sure which one is worse. Right? What does it mean for a person that is autonomous to the nature of God to be in the presence of God? If I were me, and if I were a person that despised God and hated God, and the wrath of God had not been dealt with through Jesus, do you think I want to spend eternity anywhere near God? That's even more scary than hell probably is. Get me to the one place where he is not. It's a very interesting concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is the mercy of God.
Yeah.
It's sort of like when you act up real bad and your parents are real angry, the last place you want to be is where your parents are. It is the mercy of God that you stay in that room and you do not come out. It is the mercy of God that you get out of his presence and you do not come out of that room. Right? Well, it's such a miserable place, such a hard place. Any place without God is miserable and terrible. What's the alternative? Either you want to be with him or you don't want to be with him. But if you choose not to be with him, there's consequences for it. The greatest consequence, or the most terrible part about hell is probably not the fire. The most terrible part about hell is the fact that God is absent. Right. Now, some of us will be theologians and say, well, doesn't the Bible say, well, I make a bed in hell and God is there? That's the word Hades, right? That's actually that understanding of my bed in the grave. He is there. The very essence of eternal punishment is that God has turned his face against you, and God is no longer. You don't have the beauty of. Now, we've talked about the social aspects or the emotional aspects of heaven. We have not delved into what happens to those that are in the lake of fire, right? What does it mean to be absent love and security? You ever been somewhere and just felt like you were just not loved? It's a very empty feeling. That's torture by itself. Have you ever felt unsafe, like paranoid? You've been somewhere, like go somewhere in the dark, right? It feels like you can't see what's behind you, and you're like paranoid constantly. Imagine living like that forever and never getting used to it. At some point, you get used to the darkness, right? And you start to acclimate because you've never seen true darkness, unless there's like sort of eclipse or something. But then somewhere in the universe, there still is light. But imagine being in absolute darkness. Absolute darkness. Your eyes can never get used to absolute darkness. Imagine every sense of fear and dread. And there is crying in hell. And there is death in hell. It's like endless death. That's horrible. Imagine that. How horrible that must be. Part of that is punishment. But part of that is what life without God looks like. And when you say, God, I want nothing to do with you. And God says, you know what? That's it. Welcome to eternity without me. That's really what it is. Right? Eternity without God. Some people are getting what they wanted. You wanted eternity without God. This is what it looks like. Joy and peace, that's God stuff. You don't get to take God stuff to a place where you don't want. It's like kids when they get mad at parents. I don't want to live with you. I'm tired of you. All right, then my money doesn't go with you either. You don't take well, I'm moving out. I want to know what you're moving out with. I don't want anything to do with you. All right, then. You know those clothes are mine, right? I know what you're going to wear, but you ain't wearing those. Those are mine. I'm moving on my bed. Nope, that's my bed. Eternity without God. I don't want, right, you don't want God. What does eternity look like without him? I hope that we never have to know. I hope that today becomes a seed for us in terms of thinking through the possibility of what eternity with God absolutely looks like. Don't worry, you will not be bored and miserable. There's no sorrow and crying there. You will not be crying from boredom. Like, oh God, I'm still here in heaven. It's been the longest day ever. It will not be that. All right. He'll wipe away all those tears.
Pizza.
But God will take care of us. And we benefit ourselves by asking God, help me to think. Help me to learn how to live appropriately, how to live. Because I want to learn how to live there. You will forgive me that I know this is like conceptually weird, right? We're talking about a place we've never been before.
Sure.
I ain't never been there before either. I'm just telling you what we read. I did not go to sleep last night and spend like 24 hours in heaven or anything. Come back and tell you about it. Sorry. But I do think it's important for us to keep in track what we're aiming towards, the direction in which we're trying to go. Does that make sense? Anybody? To keep the goal clearly. You did not just look over there trying to find your. The direction that we're trying to go in, right? And what God has for us. Let's stand. We're preparing to dismiss. Love you. Thank God for you. Oh, before you dismiss, you can sit back down. I'm sorry. Lady Blackman has some announcements.